done later.
Ready to go? We are recording? Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to the Bear Pit, the Committee of Whole meeting of October the 28th, 2024. I'd like to acknowledge this meeting is being held in the traditional territory of our First Nations neighbors, Prophet River and Fort Nelson. Further recognize that the treaty is that we recognize and the rights that are provided in those treaties. I want to say that we're all Treaty 8 people and finally celebrate the contributions and presence of the Métis people in our region. Please be advised that tonight's meeting is available to the public to attend virtually, is being streamed and recorded. Are there any council additions? Staff additions? Thank you. Is there any public that wish to comment? Seeing none, everybody's okay with the agenda. Good. That brings us to 5.1, Committee of the Whole, the Community FireSmart and Resilience Committee for discussion. I'll please turn it over to staff. And this is a follow-up to a discussion that we started a while ago.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. As Mayor Fraser just mentioned, this is a follow-up to discussion that was had on August the 12th in the Committee of the Whole meeting when we discussed, when council discussed the Community FireSmart and Resiliency Committee that had been formed. During that meeting, we talked about the intent of that committee, which has since been renamed to the Northeast BC FireSmart and Resiliency Working Group. So that information was provided in a separate admin report. Information is being brought back to council tonight for consideration of whether or not a separate local community FireSmart and Resiliency Committee comprising of public representation should be or could be developed as a committee of council. And the report provides some options around the development or types of councils or committees of council. Turn it over for discussion.
All righty, the floor is open for questions or comments. If anybody has any questions for Lisa or discussion. Oh, sorry. I thought I turned that off. That's twice today. I turned it back on and I shouldn't have.
It seems to get more aggressive as
it does. If I let it run all the way through, it gets extremely aggressive. Anyways, I'm sorry. We're having a discussion. I like the report. Myself, I'm leaning towards an advisory committee. I'd like to have a discussion about it. You know, I don't know if we want to talk about how many or whatever. Maybe staff can just look after that. But an advisory committee to advise council with respect to what they think we should be doing around fire resiliency, what we should be doing with the plan. My question to Lisa is about whether or not that working group would be supporting this committee. Would some of them be on it anyways? Like, because there's a whole group, right? All of those agencies have something to do with wildfire and or planning. So do you see that? How do the two marry up?
So my initial thoughts were that an NRM staff representative would be essentially on both. Like we would be facilitating both of those, and that would be the linkage back to that working group.
I see. Yeah.
Just to keep the working group at a more strategic level, but making sure that there is that linkage and sharing of information between the two.
Right. And they could be used as resource to help educate the advisory committee. I got to go through all the committee. The advisory committee, is that they would be available to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And similar to our advisory committee for the OCP, provide valuable feedback around if we draft a community wildfire resiliency plan, they would be integral to that review and to provide comment.
Right. And is there an expectation that somebody from council would sit on that advisory committee, or would it be a separate committee that advises the council?
I think that it's totally at the discretion of council of how they'd like to set up that committee.
Right. Those are my thoughts. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I attended the meeting held at the Woodlands in January. I think Scott, you were there as well. And that was a really productive meeting as far as the ideas and concerns. And yeah, I think it's just a great idea. I would invite any counselors that want to participate to come and join those discussions. But yeah, I think maybe having a certain individual, maybe an alternate, would help bridge the gap between the committee and council.
Okay, so, okay, yeah, so you threw me for a loop there with the alternate. So having somebody from council sitting there and an alternate.
An alternate in case they can't.
Yeah,
make
right,
it. Yeah,
right.
like that would be something I'd be interested in. But I work a lot of evenings and weekends, and meetings are sometimes difficult for me. So I know if we had at least one and an alternate,
Right.
then we could make sure that someone's there for every meeting.
Right.
That would be beneficial.
Councilor Goey?
Yeah, my thinking was that an advisory committee would be the way to go in terms of setting the terms of reference. I don't know, I think I would want input from the group too. There's a lot of people in our community that want to provide input, and they have a lot of great ideas. And so I would like to get information from them as to how they see this committee forming, and then how it could come back to advising council. So, and in terms of having somebody from council on there, I absolutely think that we have to. I don't know that they have to be the facilitator, but maybe, I don't really know. But I think it's important. I also think that because we all can't go to every meeting, I think this is vitally important that whoever from council is sitting on that we get a report back to the rest of council. So whether that comes from that councillor or from staff, I think it would be really, really important that we hear all of that information without having to go to all of the meetings. That's my thought.
Anybody else?
Oh, do we, can you define this a little more clear for me? Is the Northeast BC FireSmart working group, or is it more of a larger scope? Has it taken a larger scope of viewpoint? And what we're trying to do by establishing a committee is to zero it into our community? Is that kind of, that's where we're really at? I'm trying to describe it because the overlap, like I always think of how committees on committees on committees, the stacking of committees or the manning up of committees in a small community like this over a singular concept around fire smarting or fire preparedness and so on. We certainly need the grand scale of the Northeast, but we also do need to hone in. So is that really what it is?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I had the same question. I had a little bit of a discussion with staff, and I think the working group is different agencies that have plans. And they came together because their plans they're not the same plan, but their plans overlap in different places, which then allows them to see if there's synergies between them and where they can work together on certain parts of their own plans, right? So fairly high level between these different agencies.
Yeah, so the working group currently, exactly that, is Ministry of Forests is working on that WUI project for the 2-kilometer radius around Fort Nelson and McConaughey. But at the same time, the community forest is wanting to undertake wildfire risk reduction projects that fall within that WUI, and you can't have them working in isolation. At the same time, we're talking about developing a community wildfire resiliency plan for the community that has implications and relationships with the WUI. So without having those people all talking, it becomes very uncoordinated and inefficient. So that's the intent of the working group, is to really focus on that high level strategic planning, as well as look at grant opportunities and things like that to undertake work. The committee, if council so chooses to establish one, could focus more on what do they actually see working for our community, applying that local lens rather than that 25,000 foot level.
Right. And the liaison could take that information from our committee and move it up.
That's right, without taking away from the working group strategic level and almost muddying it with, the details of the local level planning or ideas or whatever may come out of that.
Because it
committee.
seems to me many of those agencies would want to hear from
Absolutely,
the advisory committee.
absolutely. So one of the comments when I raised this at the working group meeting was probably not the right place for the public to be sitting in on the current working group, but definitely important for the public to be able to provide comments on some of the plans that this working group may come out with.
Got it? Are we clear?
Yeah. I mean,
I'm,
it could evolve over time. It's new and both the working group and the committee would be a new thing and we see how it works. And then maybe at some point they do become one, or maybe they stay separate or the working group goes away. And I mean, it could look very different in a year, but
so if our intent is to create an advisory committee, the first step is really a call for membership. Is that, and then we hear how they see it. That's your point.
That's mine.
Yeah. So you pull all of them together, or, I mean, if you got 100, you've got to reduce it somehow, I think. If you got 100, it would be amazing, but yeah, you'd have to try to figure, and then from there, they work on the terms of reference. What is it that we are going to do in this committee?
I only have one comment that 100 would be like out of this world. But I think it's a great idea to have that advisory group or committee because of the education. Because there's lots of experts in the community on managing, creating fire resiliency plans, but the education of the community, the advisory group could work on the pamphlets or the training materials for that. And then the other thing is, what are other communities our size doing about fire resiliency? Like what can we model after rather than creating something from the bottom up, but looking at what's working in other communities and using that as a model. Port Nelson First Nation also is working on a project for traditional burns. So that would also be part of the fire resiliency plan, is going back to cultural burns and modeling after a community down in Williams Lake that's got a really, really successful cultural burn program. Yeah.
Good. Okay, well, if staff can come back to us, right, because we don't make decisions here, so if you want to come back to us with a bit of a report that we could put on to an agenda to authorize to make this happen. I think that's what I heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can that be like sooner rather than later? So we have lots of people in the community that are waiting and watching and would really like to give their input. So I've just been telling them that, we're hoping to get this advisory
we have a
committee
report for
or
the
whatever
meeting?
happens.
Could we have a report for the next meeting? Is that fair?
If it involves reaching out to the community and getting a bunch of people at the table to figure out what this could look like, then I think it might be a bit challenging, but.
No, just, we have to, like, we
Okay.
can't make a decision to do it here at
Okay,
this
so
meeting.
it's just the report.
Just
similar to
basically a
this.
report
Yeah,
similar to this.
absolutely.
First step is to, gather.
Yeah.
Gather folks, and then second step is to work on the terms of reference. Council will be involved. At that point, then we can decide as a group if we want to all attend or if we want to appoint somebody. We can do that at that next meeting, and then she's on the road.
Yeah, I think basically, based on this dialogue, we want to have council have the discussion. We can provide a report that's similar to this one with a recommendation and
Yeah.
maybe some basic framework, and then council can provide direction through resolution and we hit the ground running.
Good.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the report, Lisa. The next report is the report of what happened at UBCM. So on the agenda is sort of the information that we took down there with us. So I think staff is going to have a conversation with respect to what they heard. I will chime in because when I'm at these meetings, I'm kind of in the moment and not really taking many notes. And to tell you the truth, there's so many of them until they jog my memory. it all blurs together. So I'll let Scott lead this discussion and
Yeah,
Please.
Thank you, Mayor. So yeah, so we bounced around some different ideas on how best to do this, and there's so much information that can be captured. And council's already received the documents that went down, the packages with the topics and briefing notes that went down. So what we thought we'd focus more on is the dialogue that occurred in those meetings, which was basically us comparing each other's notes. Similar to the Mayor, for me, I'm more focused on the meeting at the time, so I don't take as good of notes. And the best of days is compared to what Jay and Aaron did, but we sat and kind of compared what we had and worked through that piece. So the intent to do it in this meeting was to be able to have the dialogue and for either Aaron or Jay to chime in at times too, and similarly with Counselor Souls and yourself, the Mayor, to discuss it. So we kind of attempted to go through the order that's on here, with the exception of any staff meetings that we had. We just linked them to if we have some updates or conversations regarding a minister meeting, and we had a staff meeting, we just go right into the staff meetings part of the discussion today. So as I said, like, in terms of who attended the meetings or UBCM, so the Mayor, Councillor Souls, myself, Aaron and Jaylene attended. We had a total of 16 meetings all in when you during that week. 7 of them with ministers, 4 of them with provincial partner agencies, and then ministerial staff were 5. This year we took a bit of a different approach compared to some years past, more or less to do with the election, because we weren't sure in terms of election outcome what ministers may or may not be in certain what ministers may or may not be around after the election. So we actually had put more requests than typical in with staff, so we can either get that message sent across the staff, and then in some cases provide some additional context to the staff also. So I'll get started here. So our first meeting that we had was with Minister Osborne, so the energy mine and low carbon innovation. Discussions around the need for long-term energy security was discussed. The reliance on the natural gas for power generation and some of the challenges that we potentially foresee there was part of the discussion. And support of alternate energy sources was discussed, such as geothermal. There were hydro reps that were at that meeting because as part of, the reason for the province requesting briefing notes or information or topics is so that they could prepare their own briefing notes and be prepared for discussion. So there was representation from BC Hydro at that meeting with the minister. And it was discussed about the vegetation management and the investment that BC Hydro has put in the vegetation management to the tune of $1.2 million is the budget for 2024. And as forms a part of an overall $4 million investment that's BC Hydro indicated has been in place since 2021. The Mayor discussed the challenges of EV infrastructure, especially not being part of the BC grid, and the challenges operating some of the equipment or some of the potential equipment they've suggested would go up the highway as propane generators and whatnot, considering the climate. And then also urged the minister to continue work on carbon capture and sequestration as a potential incentive for to help alleviate the natural gas concerns that we have, especially in the wake of the NRM North River Midstream's closure announcement. Anything else to add? Any questions there?
I think it's fair to say that the responses were generally muted because of the time of the year. And
Yes.
Josie was engaged because
Yep.
she's that way, right? So we had a good conversation about these things. No commitment, really no commitment of any sort.
There was an admission on the part of BC Hydro around BC Hydro's lack of having capacity to deal with their hydro lines. They kind of indicated that not so much a intentional shortage, but they have such a a stringent protocol for having contractors, that there's almost no contractors that work for BC Hydro. So anyway, that was something that came out of that one meeting.
And there was a better meeting that we'll get to later with BC Hydro themselves.
That's true, yeah.
But at this
The
meeting,
mayor makes
BC
sure.
Hydro sort of sat back.
Like,
Oh, I'm sorry. BC Hydro just sort of sat back and really didn't say a lot at this meeting. They were there, but yeah, the meeting that we had with BC Hydro themselves later on, and then we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Had some more detail, particularly around the right of ways.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Just gonna add that although it's unrelated to the topics, she was, because Minister Osborne was formerly municipal affairs, she did commend the Northern Rockies for their leadership and response during the evacuation. So,
Mm.
and she's been to Fort Nelson, so she understands what the challenges were. So, you know, it's kind of nice when there's that level of familiarity and, and recognition that it was a tough job to
Yeah.
take on, so.
And the mayor's right. I mean, the level of engagement varied from minister to minister. We saw some ministers, and we can speak to it here when we get to them, like we're not necessarily that engaged. We're used to them being engaged, and there's others that it was almost borderline awkward. I would say,
Awkward.
in terms of the discussion, it was, you know, you can tell where the focus was, and it wasn't necessarily on UBCM and the meetings. It was the election, quite frankly. The next minister meeting was with the Public Safety Solicitor General, so Minister Farnworth. I'll say we always actually enjoy having a meeting with Minister Farnworth, as he's, again, been to community before. He understands some of the challenges. He commented on his trip up here the last time, and he said if he ever wrote a memoir, autobiography, he'd have it in his book, his trip to Toad River. And he was able to see firsthand the challenges we have with being a remote community and the lack of infrastructure up the highway in the case we were dealing with. That ministry previously was specific to cell service and whatnot. Our main reason for the discussions with the meeting request this time around was specifically on the public safety component and the concerns around the policing locally. RCMP staffing at the senior leadership level, obviously the mayor brought that forward and the concerns there. And then the mayor also commented, he brought it up at the last council meeting. The mayor did comment to thank for the letter and a response that Minister Farnworth provided from MLA Davies' letter that was sent out, and acknowledge the point that the minister made in the letter in that response about bringing concerns forward to your local detachment commander. Which of course the mayor prefaced around the whole- is the problem, and Minister Farnworth's response literally looked at the mayor and said, "So who do you talk to?" And he's like, "That's why we're here." So there was a significant amount of discussion regarding that, and the fact that the remoteness of our community just magnifies that situation. It's not like your commander, if there's a shortage or whatnot in Fort St. John, they're driving from Dawson Creek or vice versa. There's a significant distance, and we witnessed that even during the evacuation when things materialized, where the commander that was up at a Fort St. John was on their way home that day and just rolled into Fort St. John when we had to make the unfortunate decision to evacuate the community. So that was discussed. There was discussion around the frequency and severity of the arsons in the community and the concerns around that at the time. And also the level of awareness in community and the community members around the staffing schedule. So in terms of, when police officers are out and police officers are in bed. So the minister and ministry staff seemed quite receptive and concerned around. I mean, there seemed to be a genuine level of concern around our concerns, and acknowledge the fact that because we had met with the minister prior to staff, because we actually had a staff request in also, and the way the requests go in is we had the request in June for the minister meetings, but the requests aren't required or even looked at till I think it was August 21st or something like that for the staff meetings. So at that point, those requests go in, we don't know if we're going to be successful in the minister meeting. So, and when we were successful in the minister meeting, the staff came back, the PSSG staff came back and said, your request seems similar for the staff meeting. do you still want to have it? Because obviously you're meeting with Minister Farnworth, and we said, yes, we still want to be able to provide, because the topics are generally the same, of course. And we said, we still want to meet because we want to provide context, and it's a real concerning issue, and 15 minutes with the minister versus 30 minutes with staff. We still want to meet. So they acknowledged at the meeting with when we met with the minister, the staff acknowledged the fact that we had our meeting with them the next day, and they were quite interested in to hear some more, to get into a deeper dive into that discussion.
And the deputy minister from the ministers' meeting explained to us that although they provide oversight on the RCMP, they do not tell the RCMP what they do and what they don't do,
Yeah.
right? It's a kind of an oversight, but that he was going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And so that was the end of the discussion that I recall, that he was going to go out of there and he was going to have a conversation. Now, whether the response we saw from the RCMP just a couple of weeks later came from that or was partially from that, we definitely saw some response here after that meeting, or whether the RCMP just figured it out that we got guns ringing out in our community. It's time for them to act.
Do something.
I don't know the answer to that.
I have a
but-
suspicion it's a bit of a little combination of all the above.
Yeah, so maybe just, we all know how it is. You don't actually tell them, but you have a, bit of a conversation about what's going on, and that tends to loosen the wheels a little bit. So I hope that, and I felt like that was one of the best meetings we had with respect to reaction from a minister and staff.
Yeah. Which fast forward to the next day, when we actually met with the staff, similar concerns were raised in that meeting. We were able to provide some additional context and a little bit more specific about the local safety issues. And get into the some of the things that were occurring in community that, frankly, we said if they were happening in Vancouver, there'd be press conferences and media, and everyone would be going to like ramping this stuff up, and we continue to be frustrated by what we perceive to be a lack of from the policing side around being taken seriously. Talked around the challenges talked about the potential for vigilantes to take things into their own hands. And that's a serious concern. The staff indicated that, typically if there's a vacancy at the senior level or NCO level in a community, that a lot of times the district super will kind of step in and take over, have meetings. And we did indicate that there was backfilling that was occurring from other detachments, but not from a local perspective. And quite frankly, they have their day jobs too. They weren't just moved here, they were doing both. And that's why there was a rotation and whatnot. And quite frankly, because we wanted to confirm that, have we had conversations at the district level at North District? We said, absolutely, confirmed, the challenges just even to get a response at times. And then they asked, they'll usually that those particular roles, they'll actually come meet with council. And he said, we haven't met that level of the organization.
Yeah, our discussion about statistics this year fell out of an envelope.
We
Normally
talked about that.
you have the detachment commander here talking about what they've done and what the plans are for next year. And so, really put across that local conversation is just not happening. The communication with the local is just not there.
And like I said, similar to the conversations we have with the minister, there seemed to be a genuine level of receptiveness in terms of their concerns. And we made the comment, or I think I made the comment, something to the effect of, we do understand the ministry's role, that, you are at arm's length. You're not in the operation. You're not dealing with the operational activities within the RCMP. You ensure that there's they're responsible to have the police force and to provide public safety as a ministry, but they're not giving operational direction per se, right? And I said, I understand you have limitations, and I think the response was, we have our ways to deal with it. And I think there were some conversations, quite frankly, because a couple phone calls did occur actually just prior and afterwards that I don't know would have happened from levels of the RCMP if that those conversations didn't happen at the ministry level. And the other thing that was, when you have those conversations, you don't necessarily build relationships, but you definitely put a name to a face, and you understand what the roles are, and and you get a bit of an idea if you do reach out to the certain individuals at that ministry, if you're gonna get any reaction or not. And quite frankly, when we, the following week, the week after UBCM, when things start to ratchet up, we were having issues on Willow Road, and we had the fire down in Billers, and then back at Willow Road, and then the truck behind it. I reached out to that specific contact. And I mean, I reached out to anyone who listened to the RCMP, but I also reached out to contacting the ministry and said, since our meeting last week, this is what's occurred, and I listed it, right? And again, not sure if the cavalry rolled in as a result of that, but I don't think it hurt, to be quite
Mhm.
honest, right? Because that's when things really started to, we started to really see some resources we shown, brought in the community. So I think it was definitely worthwhile to have the meetings with the minister and with the ministry staff, for sure. Anything else? Environment and climate change strategy. This was Minister Heyman. So we've dealt with the minister before. He was, I'll say, less engaged at that meeting. Didn't really say much at the very beginning. It was either Deputy Minister ADM that was doing the majority of the talking, and he didn't the minister didn't say a word until probably the last 3-4 minutes of
That's
the
right.
meeting.
It's surprising because normally he's very engaged at the start of the meeting and he just,
He is,
I almost thought that maybe he was sick.
Yeah, we weren't sure if there was something, but it definitely seemed different, because we've had meetings outside of UBCM, I mean, virtual, but with the minister, and no shortage of words typically. So it was definitely not something, it was unexpected, I'll say. There was a focus and discussions the mayor brought up around the amount of land base impacted by wildfire and the reliance on the data that is felt to be dated or inaccurate that is driving the caribou protection and restoration restrictions. And a pause in the process was requested, basically. Again, no commitments and whatnot, but that was thrown out there. Discussions around the acquired campground outside of Montreal Lake. So a little bit of the same, what was already communicated through staff prior, around the fact that there's some funds in next year's budget. Of course, the budget's not approved yet, but they have some funds shoehorned for additional work at that campground. And the original intent at this point is to open it up as a bit of a rustic campground, and hope that it's open next season. So not the full-fledged service with water, sewer, and power as they originally thought of upfront, but they're hoping to possibly get to that. But to kind of bridge the gap is to have it open as more of it just as is. I'm thinking. Something's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And there was discussions around, having some level of public engagement in terms of what the public would like to see as what the camping spot services and whatnot. So that was discussed, and the mayor brought that up. The mayor expressed appreciation for the engagement with regards to the MK planning for the backcountry parks, and just being part of that. The mayor being part of it, had witnessed it firsthand in terms of how that engagement occurred, and it's good to go into these meetings guns a-blazing, but it's also give appreciation where it's due. So that was good. And then there was discussion about the output-based pricing, so the carbon tax essentially. Was discussed, and the staff communicated that there would be, what we got out of it is little impact currently on the existing producers based on the delay. So like an 18-month time frame, even though certain pricing components might be communicated as they take effect, they don't necessarily, or this is what comes into play, they don't necessarily take effect at that time. So our understanding is that the producers would possibly see an impact on the road, but they weren't seeing immediate impacts based on the way the output pricing mechanism works. They discussed, they were aware of some of the challenges that producers have with some of the policy change or legislation changes that were coming through when it comes to output pricing. They indicated that they we're in discussions and negotiations with various producers, even to the point where they have some NDAs in place where they couldn't discuss everything because obviously the information is protected. And they also acknowledged or indicated that the output-based pricing system being developed is for the Ministry of Energy Mines and Low Carbon Innovation.
Yep, go ahead.
I just want to go back a moment to the campgrounds. Was there any response to the fact that the Summit Lake washroom was out of commission for the entire season because there was no budget to repair the stairs?
No.
Perfect.
No.
So the stairs are getting replaced. The process seemed, and this is us having conversations with the ministry staff, not at UBCM, just outside of that conversation. So the last that we heard is that the stairs were getting replaced. They actually had either had or found the budget or funds to be able to replace them. But by the time they got through the procurement process to award, that there was a likelihood that the contractor would have it replaced before the
End of the
season ended. So they might be replaced now. We don't know that, but that's what we got back. So
Yeah, and at the meeting, it was just basically, we have a small budget.
Yeah.
Small budget. That's all they said. We have a small budget.
Again, if this was a park down south anywhere and the only working washroom was not working.
we used it. We can get into that a little later. We used a tourism meeting we had to discuss some of the challenges we see with, tourism or future tourism, and the fact that, the budgets are pittance, right? I mean, there's things that we do, frankly, that we shouldn't be doing. I mean, I think, for instance, the last signs that got replaced for all the trailheads and stuff, it was a partnership that we added some funding that we received, but they're getting sunbaked now, and it's just, I mean, you talk about, the natural beauty of the North or BC, and I mean, we're not going to argue to say or not agree with the fact that what we see up here doesn't necessarily seem to fit with what occurs down south, for sure. Next meeting was Emergency Management Climate Readiness, so EMCR. So with Minister Ma, appreciation was expressed to the minister for staff support throughout the evacuation. The mayor talked about the demands on local government and on staff, especially executive staff within local government during emergency management situations, and how essentially we've had full seasons that have come and gone where we've had staff dedicated. During last year EOC, with the amount of days EOC was activated, so 2023 and then 2024 was similar but worse with the evacuation and the challenges that is, especially these smaller organizations have, like us, where we're wearing multiple hats in our roles, which just basically you shift your focus and things don't get done with the other hat you would be wearing. The mayor spoke to the need around the flexibility within the new EDMA regulations that were being developed, and discussed the need to work and get that support from EMCR with the utility operators, i.e. BC Hydro is an example, so that to ensure that right-of-ways are adequately managed, and especially in high-risk areas, because that was when we talked about the amount of right-of-ways that BC Hydro has. It was like, well, one of the areas you can focus on is areas that are level 4 or 5 drought,
Yeah.
that have a higher likelihood if a tree hits a power line, that's going to create a bigger issue, right?
Yeah. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You've got to start somewhere, and Minister Ma recognized that this is a BC Hydro responsibility.
Yeah.
They have to look after the right of ways used. So that was a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that one? You good? We also met with the MCR staff and relayed similar messages, discussed around the demands on local governments. One of the areas that Aaron emphasized during the meeting was the need for the MCR to have ample capacity within the ministry to provide critical support for communities during activations, particularly in light of the EDMA legislation and a lack of regulations to accompany it. We're we're aware of some concerns at the regional level around the capacity component. And the I guess because it's unknown where things will land from regulatory or regulation perspective, there's concerns that there might not be adequate capacity to support the recovery and the planning component. That's not staff piece. And we got the answer we thought we were gonna get. It wasn't that we wanted to get it, but we just assumed is well, there is provincial capacity, but the challenge is we have much better luck, quite frankly, dealing at the regional level with who's at the regional level versus the provincial level in many cases, right? Trying to get someone's attention in Victoria is a lot different than getting the attention of Prince George, especially when we're fortunate. We have two from a regional perspective, and also the people in those roles, right? Understand they've been here many times. They understand the uniqueness, the challenges, and I think, I mean, if anything, we're even just trying to support them with concerns that there, is there going to be an adequate capacity to deal with some of the new requirements that EDMA has that's going to be laying out. And we also discussed the eligible reimbursements for the local governments during emergency events, talked about how certain things have been denied for us as an organization, where we talked about the uniqueness of a remote community and some of the challenges. How, again, it's this one size fits all approach where everything's painted with a broad brush, and it's easy to say no, but we have a pretty good story to back up the reason why we think something should be justified. We talked about the food and the dogs, and I mean, again, sort of becomes frustrating with us because people have no idea that what we deal with, right? They're like, well, your bylaw can do this and your animal control can do that. I'm like, hold on, that's a contractor. We don't have SPCA, we don't have this, and we're 4 hours away to the nearest community. So it was good dialogue, but at the same time, it didn't seem to resonate as we had hoped. Nothing against the people in the roles, but again, it's just some people, unless you experience it or know it, they don't really know what we're dealing with up here, right? It's just a completely different world. So, and I might have had a small rant about how the committee was picked. Not because, and I actually said I'm going to rant now, but not because they actually had any control. It was more on the say, like, wouldn't you want to actually have some involvement as an agency? Right? Like I was trying to, they didn't bite at all, but I was, trying to get across, like, as an agency, wouldn't, because it really resonated with me when I communicated. I'll get farther into that later with the conversations with UBCM is when they made a certain comment, they're like, well, what does the EMCR support have to do with this process? And it's like, well, I would think they'd have a lot to do with the process, considering they're the agency that provides the service, right? So I'd ask, like, in terms of the committee, picking the community development of that committee for the development of the regulations, like I had to ask them, like, wouldn't you think you'd want to have more involvement in that process?
It was almost like they saw it as a tick box. It didn't impact them. It was something that needed to be done, and it was handed off to somebody else. They
were literally like, okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that was a waste of breath. It was bizarre, wasn't it? Yeah, I was like, because I was hoping to get something. I was hoping to get a bit of a reaction and get something from them to say, yeah, we would like to be more involved. But and maybe they were prepped for it because we made it. It wasn't like it wasn't something that we kept secret, right? But so anyhow,
I came around and asked the minister to put her finger on the scale to let Aaron on the committee. It didn't go nowhere.
No. Maybe they don't want.
Yeah.
They don't want the experience.
Yes.
They don't want. That is good.
Well, we had a conversation with an EMCR staff member a week and a half ago. So they're now looking at revising the financial guidelines. So in terms of what is or isn't an eligible expense under an emergency. And this EMCR staff member said that they were asked by their provincial counterparts down in Victoria to say, well, we're just going to use that task force committee that we struck, a year and a half ago, and we'll just ask them what they think we should do with the financial guidelines. And the staff member said that is absolutely the worst thing that you could do. Because that task force that was created 2 years ago did not have any rural remote representation. And that's where the that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's where you're gonna find communities that don't fit in that little box that they seem to be creating where everybody, they want us to
Mhm.
fit into. So that message is still not getting through.
But we'll keep trying. They know who we are.
Yes, they do.
They might not be able to point us out on a map, but they know who we are. Meeting with Minister of Municipal Affairs, so Minister Kang, we're required as part of our IDCA agreement to meet annually with the minister and the staff. So it's, brief discussion about the IDCA agreement. And then the mayor did talk about, because they are the ministry responsible for immigration provincial level. So the minister did bring up the concerns around the federal program changes that are will most likely or quite possibly impact the local members of this community who live here, and put that plug in there to see if there's any kind of support that can occur from that ministry. And then we talked about or discussed the potential impacts of the NRM, the North River Midstream's closure announcement, and the potential that could have on delinquent taxes, not specific to NRM, but just even the producers. We continue to raise the concern annually with the ministry around the mechanism of delinquent taxes and the challenge we have, because it's just unique to us since we become since we were incorporated as a regional municipality. So we bring it up annually, and advise that there's a possibility or a likelihood that there'd be an increase in tax write-offs due to delinquent taxes in the future. We also met with ministry staff, so municipal affairs staff presented a draft copy of the AIDP, so the annual infrastructure development plan, which is done required. The deadline for that is the end of this month, which basically it's a bit of a report card that acknowledges or outlines what projects occurred based on what we said we would do, because we do a June progress report and then we do this AIDP in October, and then also indicates what the plan may look like for next year. So we presented that because usually we provide the draft at that meeting. It's not required. We just do it as part of the we say we've operationalized the process. We with that staff at that time, we've been discussing, we're hoping to get into some further dialogue around the potential to increase funding. I mean, that's going to be our end goal, and utilize affordability and we'll call it the Fort Nelson factor, in regards to cost. So one of the things the program didn't acknowledge, the IDCA program didn't acknowledge, is it didn't factor in inflation or anything. So your projects that you plan for are 2014 dollars, and those dollars don't go the same distance today. So this year is our 5-year window for the indicators to be reviewed. Because of course the agreement originally was 10 million a year by the province, and then 5 years in they reduced it to 5, and they have the indicators, which is gas flow, transient population or airport numbers, and then population of the community, which a formula spits out to say if you'd receive further funding or not. We're taking a bit of a different angle as part of this process to support our information and justify the fact that it's cost us a lot more to provide services to the community from a capital perspective. And we used 44th Street as an example in terms of what that original budget was and where it landed. The challenges we're having to even just acquire contractors, to get contractors to bid on jobs up here. And we did some we've done some comparisons between us and some larger centers, northern larger centers, so Grand Prairie, Edmonton, Prince George, and then Vancouver, in terms of how the inflationary measures and what real-time numbers. So we're talking, we provided comparisons of what our projects and procurements or tenders look like compared to those, and ours have gone up, have escalated at a much faster pace, higher pace than other departments. So we're working on that in the background, but our goal is to have the conversations around the fact that it's becoming increasingly challenging from an affordability perspective to maintain a level of service from an infrastructure perspective based on the fact that that the dollar is not going as far as it did, but it's going a lot less farther for us than other communities based on the remoteness and the challenges we have, right? And use examples of challenge we have with Northern Health and the CT scanner as an example in terms of what the cost of CT scanner would be in and the ratio or the formula that they're using just because of what they're seeing right the farther north. So again, it was, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts with that. It's not just the ministry staff, it's the minister's support of the province and the treasury board too. But that's a bit of an angle that we're working on right now and had some really good conversation. I think our meeting went much longer than the half-hour allotment, but they get a special room and everything. We're not in there with everyone else doing the speed dating and all the noise in the background. So, jobs, economic development, innovation. So Minister Bailey, that was a bit of a different conversation. When you talk about where we might be located on a map and knowledge of us as a community, it was a bit, I'll be honest. I mean, I was deflated after the conversation in terms of not knowing where we are, what we have, knowing the conversations that we've had over the past few years, the battles that we've picked and I've picked with ministry staff within that ministry regarding the rail line, and to say that it's politicized and talking to assistant deputy ministers or deputy ministers. And that was during Minister so Ravi Callan days when Minister Callan was the minister for that ministry. And then to sit in a meeting and have a meeting where, quite frankly, we're asked if we actually have a rail line that comes to our community or not. Are we looking for funding to upgrade a rail line, or do you already have a rail line to your community?
How close does the rail
how
line
close the
come
rail line
to your
come to
community
community?
already? It was obvious that the deputy ministers didn't let her know what our rail issue was. Right? And those are deputy ministers that we've been working with, or the staff have been working with for years. And the minister didn't even know that we had a rail line coming into the community.
Yeah.
It was like, it was like a gut punch.
Yeah, it was. So, I mean, it was discussed around the need for local forestry manufacturing and the significant limitation being the rail line and the ability to get, products to market, and the fact that, the need for investment in the line beyond federal funding was emphasized. And also discussed was the reduction of natural gas economy and the need for favorable provincial policy to support investment in production in this community. So yes, that was a unique one, and clearly I'll be honest, the focus was on the election. Tourism, arts, culture, and sport. Minister Popham, Councillor Souls also really enjoys this. When being the previous ag minister, knows Danny well, so and she's and she's well informed even in this ministry. It was iterated that tourism remains a strong economic driver for the NRM, especially given the downturn in the other sectors that we're seeing. Talked about permitting and the challenges of permitting for some of the operators who want to expand their services up highway. Can become frustrating and challenging, having to jump through the hoops. Mayor brought up the 30 by 30 goals and the impacts it could have on the land base. With the and the potential or risk that it might restrict backcountry accommodations. Did discuss the need for basic tourism infrastructure, and this is where you get
Back to the Muncho Lake.
Muncho Lake and the lack of camping amenities, right? And the fact that you can't camp at a pullout because there's no overnight camping. So you want more people to come to the region to enjoy the region, but when you get into Muncho Lake Provincial Park, unless you're in a designated camping area, you're not, and it's not a lot of camping areas, right? So it's a bit of a.
So they're ripping right through.
Yeah.
Because there's no place to stay.
So there was some good dialogue about that, which then led into some discussions in regarding to potential funding opportunities. Funds that we weren't aware of, or opportunities I don't think we were aware of, but I think it was the when the funding's announced is it's kind of end of season. It's almost like
end
they
of
look
year money.
they look
Yeah.
at funds budgets and then they have these funds that they make available, which is kind of almost last minute, I guess,
Yeah.
right? Which we had, it was indicated or suggested that next year, it'd be part of more of a fulsome budget, so that they're more of an annualized program, because it's almost annualized now, but it's not budgeted per se. It's happens every year, but it happens towards the end of the year when they look at that. I mean,
And they had the statistics there. They looked through, said, well, you guys haven't applied for any of this before.
Yeah.
And we said, what is that? And that's when they explained that at the end of, it's end of year money, sort of left over in their budget that they get out. And yeah, you've
Yeah.
got to be ready for it.
and that was the one that, 'cause that was the fairs, festivals, and events stream, which is we did. I know that which isn't the same one though, because I was getting at the time, be honest with you, confused, because I know there was funds that was accessed or was successful with the society. So and this didn't seem to be the same one, because that's when they popped it out and said, no,
Yeah.
you haven't received,
haven't
this hasn't
applied,
been
yeah.
applied from anyone in Fort Nelson. So that's a follow-up piece that we have to look at. We were declined a Minister of Forest meeting, but we did meet with forestry staff. We did provide appreciation, because that's where BC Wildfire sits sits within the Ministry of Forest. So we provide our appreciation regarding the collaboration relationship we have with the local BC Wildfire staff, and the IMTs, the incident management teams that came to the community. We discussed the need for increased capacity at the local zone office and what we see there, and the condition of that particular area, lack of amenities, and the fact that they have to shut it down when it gets cold. And we're saying fires continue to burn. Like we witnessed last year, we saw, the base being shut down because pipes are starting to freeze and whatnot, but there's still fire in the landscape, right? And you said, we really want to push this issue, because it's frustrating for the local staff out there. We don't want to throw them under the bus or anything, but we want to because we want to be able to support them. But what we see is that there needs to be an increased emphasis and focus on that particular area, especially considering wildfire seasons are starting earlier and later, or not ending at all. What we're seeing, I mean, I'm really happy to see the snow with minimal frost in the ground
Yeah.
right now. But we need an awful lot of it. Otherwise, we're all preparing for a similar start to the season next year, unless we see some dramatic weather changes. So, spoke to the concept of exchanging, because the mayor actually sat with a staff meeting, because mayor spoke to the concept of exchanging, the potential of exchanging crown land with areas that might have a high potential wildfire risk, or an area that you might want to do treatment management from a fuel reduction perspective around the community, with the possibility of future development, maybe as ag land, for example, right? So you might have an area that might be, currently not under ALR or as ag land, and it might make sense to pull the fiber out of it, reduce the fuel, and if it makes sense, an opportunity to pull or to have it as agricultural land, because we know how that works when it comes to fire breaks or to assist with fuel mitigation. So they were receptive to that. And it was noted that work was underway with First Nations on the Liard Basin Land Use Plan Agreement, and noted that there's an opportunity for the NRM to participate as part of that process.
And that's with the Casca.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. We did, which actually, I don't know if I circulated, because we did actually bring those maps. That's conversation you and I had, Councillor Grewing, around overlaying maps.
Yeah,
Did I ever provide them to you?
no.
Of course I never. We brought them with us and distributed them. So that's something I'll distribute to council. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, with that, which outlines the wildfires in 23, 24, the caribou reduction areas, the
Yeah.
MK area, and potential proposed land use with the yard.
And does it show that there's nothing left for
It's
anything?
a pretty big park. It's fairly significant. But
Picture says a thousand words, right?
It tells a picture, yeah. It definitely tells a story for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. We met with Waterlands Resource Stewardship staff, also spoke about the value of collaboration when developing plans such as the caribou plan. So, concerns that when we fought as an organization to have a seat at the table, we had discussions, and then there was a version that was provided after the fact that we weren't part of. And just discussed around the concerns there. Talked about the concerns around the plan and what we feel is being utilized with dated information, that we feel is dated prior to even the wildfires occurring, and now with the amount of wildfires on the landscape, there's some concerns there that might have been a caribou area before, but it might not necessarily be one today. And that's conversations we're having with our neighbors also regarding that, just to see what their thoughts are, because I think there's some agreement there that there's information that's not necessarily that's driving decisions that might not necessarily be the most accurate information or appropriate.
Yeah.
In this
It's time for a new baseline,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
Their ministry staff noted that some areas were selected based on areas that were lower quality fiber, and suggested that studies indicate that caribou have not evacuated burned areas in other similar areas across the country that have experienced similar events. So I get in the day, just prove it.
Yeah.
Right. Demonstrated with information. So so that was that staff meeting. We didn't meet with the minister. BCEHS, so agency, we met with BCEHS. We had a reasonable conversation with them. I mean, one of the things I can say about BCEHS over the past few years and my involvement and direct involvement with them is they've been receptive to our concerns, and we've actually seen change at times based on a lot of the feedback we provide. And I think it's important to provide that feedback when they do occur, because if we walk in and beat up people and provide feedback, constructive feedback, and they change course, or at least do what they can from our perspective that demonstrate that they're making an attempt. I think it's important that we acknowledge that, and we've seen that. So we actually had some good conversation. They discussed the reliance on moving patients via air with these diversions, and the importance of them, what they're really focused on. They talked about our uniqueness. They discussed the rotary wing, that the helicopter that's sitting in Fort St. John, and the 2 fixed air wing. The rotary wing for sure is, I think it's a month to month. Each month they have to basically justify that particular apparatus being there based on the need, because it's not just part of a normal budget, but we did talk about, the potential opportunities of hopefully having something there full time in the future, based on the fact that when you look at a disruption in service from the service they provide, it's magnified where we are, just because of the distance to travel, right?
Is that full-time in Fort St. John?
The plane, the helicopters, yeah.
Right, so we need to do some information gathering about that rotary helicopter service. Because the information that I'm getting is it's not necessarily a solution that's gonna work here. So we should maybe.
Yeah, I
look
was
into
chatting
that.
about that. Yeah.
We should, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
For sure. They're doing either doing a study or just completing a study on the potential to add for more resources. So basically a second car locally full time. And again, they're doing the study on a community by community basis. So they're recognizing the challenges to provide the service locally based on the distance that there's no backup, right? No backfill capacity, or if there is, it's going to take a while to get here. So, So that was good discussion and I mean, and they discussed the challenges they have as an agency within the province too, in terms of accessing funds and what they have to fight for. And I mean, they're all different agencies are fighting over the same nickel. Talked about a new critical care team that's based in Prince George to support fixed wing and rotary wing resources there, which is good. And so they've been really working towards, from what they've indicated, upgrading the service within that and the training and the certifications to provide a certain service. And a lot of it, fortunately, has been driven by ER closures, but you know, an increased level of service is required because they're moving patients, critical patients that are being moved to a certain area in many cases because service is not there locally because of an ER closure. So yeah, so that was a reasonable conversation with them, but we'll circle back with you also going to discuss that piece. That's the first I heard of that one, was we have talked directly with Lee about that service. And the other piece is the new aircrafts are changing and they're in process of switching over to actually have the ability to land on gravel runways. So the actual fixed wing aircraft, so the medivacs, which is good for places like Toad River and things like that to land on the runway there. So met with BC Hydro. So a lot more discussion in detail. They actually had someone virtually joining in to talk about how vegetation management occurs and what they do there and how they fly over the lines and determine it. They're more or less from that high voltage distribution system, like say Rainbow Lake to Fort Nelson versus the local distribution network. Or maybe it's the other way around, I can't recall now.
Distribution.
Yeah, transmission versus distribution. But indicated, you know, the process they go to, they did it as Councillor Souls mentioned, they did discuss the challenges they've had around acquiring appropriate contractors because there's a specific skill set and certification that's required to deal with that vegetation around those high voltage lines. As I mentioned earlier, they talked about the $1.2 million that was part of the budget this year to look after approximately 162 kilometers of line, which I think a portion of that is vegetation management along the transmission line to Rainbow Lake, because of course a lot of work was done there, and that was more around just trying to prevent the disruption of service because the amount of fires burning in the area taking out that line. And discussed the application they have submitted, or sorry, that Enbridge has submitted to supply natural gas, looking just more of for that long-term gas supply to the Fort Nelson generating plant, given the current situation with North River. Northern Health, met with Northern Health, so Chero and Steve Raper discussed the CT scanner project has advanced beyond the business case. It's now poised to determine the funding sources. We can have a lengthy conversation with this, so I'll just kind of stay with the highlights and estimated that approximately $2.5 million will be needed to be raised from external funding in addition to what the regional hospital district funding would be. Then discussed work is on the way. Obviously, there's a lot more discussion on the CT piece, but we'll save that for a regional hospital district meeting probably and get more into detail with that. And we are looking at getting, I'll call it the appropriate players together with Northern Health. So as staff, we can have a discussion around where we are with this project and what, in terms of the budget, the potential, a lot of options have been looked at when it comes to a portable unit. There's a lengthy list of items you want to talk to them about, but we want to make sure we get the right people in the room. So we're asking them to make sure the right people in the room so we can get a fulsome answer. Other conversations with Northern Health revolved around the regional transportation initiatives, the potential scheduled bus service, work with NDI, and the pilot project from the coordinating services and the appointments at other facilities to support non-emergency patients out of, yeah, patients, so. And the last but not least, UBCM policy development. So I did meet with the policy analyst with Barca Hoda. Because I promised I wanted to meet him face to face or in person to discuss the concerns I had with the selection of the committee for the EDMA regulations, and actually invited fellow CAO Sean from PRD.
Sean Dolan.
Sean Dolan. And John's joke was always just play bad cop, but it's fun to be a good cop. But similarly, I mean, we're in the same boat, right? When I you know, with Sean's permission, when I sent a correspondence previously to UBCM, to the executive, I acknowledge, I wanted to not just encompass our 85,000 square kilometers of area that we represent. I wanted to also acknowledge the 100,000, 105,000, that took essentially just 200,000 between us and PRD.
Yeah.
And the closest representation is Prince George. Right. And question how the committee was picked, what credentials they required, who reviewed the credentials, and right. And I mean, the ship has sailed. I mean, the committee's picked and whatnot, but at the end of the day, it was just if anything, it felt good to voice the concerns in person and have that conversation. And there were some commitments of follow-up that were going to be made in terms of how is our voice going to be heard as an organization, and PRDs as an example, as they do go through this. So we've got myself and Sean will be doing some follow-up with that. Because there were some commitments in terms of timelines and what they would do and whatnot. So. And that's UBCM, a week's worth of 16 meetings in 45 minutes or less.
There was one thing I thought you missed with Hydro. We asked them, and it's a follow-up thing, to give us the criteria required for a contractor to do
That's
right
right.
away.
Yeah.
Because we have contractors here that potentially might just need to upgrade a little bit, like any of the wildfire folks that Samuel Burkis and her crew.
Yeah.
Potentially could be contractors to do that. So we wanted to know what the criteria were so we could pass that along to local contractors who might be able to then.
That's right.
Upgrade to whatever level they needed so that then they could bid on that work.
And did they commit to
But
providing?
yeah, to providing that
Yeah,
information.
we gotta
That's a
circle back
follow-up
with
thing
them.
for us to follow up with them and find out what those criteria are. Yeah, because they said they would provide that to us. So
We'll do that. And then lastly, I want to thank Aaron and Jay for taking excellent notes, because
Yes.
if they didn't, I couldn't sit here and do this, quite frankly. So
Yeah.
it was excellent notes that were taken, and I think the discussions are worthwhile that we actually are down there representing the community and the organization. Like I said, this year was a bit of a unique year with the election occurring, and so there was the engagement seemed a little bit different from a couple for sure. I think Minister Farnworth not, because he wasn't coming back anyway. So
yes,
but which is unfortunate because he's been an ally for us. But all in all, it was a busy week with the conversations. I think went well, and I think we presented the information quite well and represented the organization.
yeah. I think the process we use is a good one. I think having council support and staff support there to really capture the notes, because you're in the moment, right? We're in the moment, the three of us, when we're talking, and so it's great to have staff there to capture all the information that
You can't talk and take minutes at the same time or scribe at the same time. Well, Jay kind of does that pretty.
not in
yeah, but
15
there-
minutes, not in a 15-minute
But
meeting.
for that,
anyway,
there
when
it's
you've
a
got
lot
four
of
or five topics.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
information.
Okay, go ahead.
So just to the council people that went, did anybody make it to any of the resolution sessions or? no?
I made it to a few of them. They didn't get to the ones that I was interested in, and I'm just drawing a blank now on which one it was. Something to do with natural gas. And
It was banning any fossil fuel producers from sponsoring
that's
UBCM.
right.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And
And they didn't get to that.
they didn't get to it, and so they were just what they do with those is they take it to the executive
Mhm.
and let the executive decide what to do.
And the trade show was good.
Trade show was pretty good. We didn't get an awful lot of time to.
Smaller,
Yeah, it was definitely
it
smaller,
smaller?
definitely
because,
smaller.
because last year took up both sides, right? This
Yeah.
year was just the half side, but
Yeah.
it was good.
Thanks.
Next year we're in Victoria, then back to Vancouver, then
Vancouver.
Whistler. Yeah, because it was a double 2 years in a row. Might have been the pandemic that might have throw off the schedule, not sure, because I'm not aware of any communication in terms of the change of the cycle, but we had 2 years in a row in Vancouver.
Okay. Any other questions for Scott? Okay, is there any, there's no new business, so is there any public online that have any questions? No? Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, staff, for that report. It was good.